Greetings and welcome to our annual Kwanzaa program online edition with Afriware Books Company. Hi, my name is Nzinga Nomo, owner and founder of Afriware Books Company since 1993. And I'm so thankful to actually re-record this portion so that we could bring their presentations to you. Our guests consisted of Dr. Artika Tyner, Janice Faye Kearney, Dr. Bacon, and Natasha Tarpley. Let's start with Dr. Artika Tyner. Dr. Artika Tyner is a passionate educator, award-winning author, a civil rights attorney, and sought-after speaker and an advocate for justice. She lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and is the founder of the Planting People, Growing Justice Leadership Institute. Dr. Tyner received her BA from Hamline University, major in English, certificate in conflict studies. Due to her passion for advocating for social justice and educational policy reform, she decided to pursue graduate studies at the University of St. Thomas. She began her journey with law school since she recognized that the law is a language of power, and therefore she sought to become well-versed in the law. Subsequently, Dr. Tyner earned a Master of Public Policy and Leadership in order to gain tools for effecting social change through policy reform efforts. Later, inspired by the legacy of W.E.B. Du Bois, she obtained a doctorate in leadership. Her doctoral studies provided her with key tools for serving in her community and promoting social justice.
Hello, my name is Dr. Artika Tyner. I'm honored to join you today as we celebrate Kwanzaa. And when we think about this as the power of creativity, it's a gift that we inherited from our ancestors to create and innovate wherever we are in the world as people of African descent. And I took on that legacy by making sure that we were telling our stories, preserving our history and culture through the power of books. This led to the founding of Planting People, Growing Justice, publishing house, and bookstore. And I'll tell you a little bit of the reason why behind my story. As a lawyer, we're often told that we need to find a solution when we see a challenge. And for me, the invitation for change was related to literacy, that many of my clients learned how to read in prison. We basically created a rule in four that 1 in 4 American children are not reading at grade level by 4th grade. And if you're not reading at grade level by 4th grade, that you're 4 times more likely to drop out of school. And here's a connection related to my work as a civil rights attorney, that you're 3.5 times more likely to get arrested in your lifetime, hence entering into that tangled web of mass incarceration with far too many entry points and far fewer exit points. What does this mean for us? For many, they would just observe the problem and say, isn't that a shame or isn't that too bad? But we know from the history of our ancestors that when we do see those problems, we create a solution. Hence, what came of this was the genesis and the beginning of starting our bookstore, which was launched in 2017, along with our publishing house. We were determined to do 2 things. For the bookstore, to make sure that we had a positive representation of African American children and adults on the pages of our books. Building upon the research of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, of the importance of both mirrors and windows. That mirror to have a positive representation of yourself, that motivation for young children, African American children in particular, to see that they can be whatever they dream. And that piece from President Johnson Sirleaf, that idea that if your dreams aren't big enough to scare you, they're not big enough. So our goal is to help children dream as they read our books, but also for all children, to create those windows, that positive representation that they can also learn from and create and build cultural bridges. And the next step, of course, was developing our own content, hence the publishing house. How do all these pieces come together and how do they relate to Kwanzaa? What an invitation to think about all the principles related to unity, related to purpose, but also related to Ujamaa, this idea of cooperative economics. How can we help to support and build a vibrant economy? And we can do this by creating our own products and services and making a personal determination and commitment daily to buy Black and support the businesses in our local economy. So here it is, an invitation for you today to take that creativity, lean into it, build the products that we haven't seen yet, support and innovate related to teaching and learning and all those pieces. Take your piece of the puzzle and let's make a difference. In that legacy of Kwanzaa, how can we create a difference and plant those seeds of social change? Thank you.
Next, we have Janice F. Kearney. Janice Faye Kearney grew up in rural Arkansas, the daughter of cotton sharecroppers. The author and publisher writes about hers and other Southerners' lives through short stories, memoir, autobiography, biography, and fiction. She has been writing all her life, but began her writing life in earnest in 2001. Janice attended and graduated from the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville with a BA in journalism. She credits Arkansas poet Millier Williams, civil rights leader Daisy Gatson Bates, and her father, T.J. Kearney, for the path she chose to write stories in hopes of changing the world. Janice serves as publisher of the historical Arkansas State Press, founded by civil rights legends Daisy Gatson Bates and Elsie Bates, and as personal diarist to America's 42nd President, William J. Clinton. In 2014, after the death of literary icon Maya Angelou, she founded the Celebrate Maya Project, a 501c3 nonprofit, which serves as a bridge for young people in search of their own voices and a forum for youth to learn their history and create their own stories through writing workshops, literary competition, and public forums. Janice was inducted into the Arkansas Writers Hall of Fame in 2016 and in 2014 received the prestigious University of Arkansas Lemke Journalism Award. Please join me in welcoming Janice Faye Kearney.
I should have, here we go. And make sure that the view, okay. Ms. Kearney, are you?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
here. I'm here. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Nzinga, for inviting me to be a part of this day, a very important day as we celebrate Kwanzaa and this day, Karamba. I am very excited that you are recognizing this important week for our community. And I can tell you, you asked the question at one point, whether I could relate my journey to the creativity that is exemplified in today's representation. And I certainly can. And it has grown over the years. And just like the former speaker, my writing started early, and it came from my need to express myself and to express other people's lives and their experiences. So my writing began when I was very young. And as you said, I'm thankful to a number of people for making sure that happened. And my father is the very first one who was an excellent storyteller. And the next one was Miller Williams, who was a creative writing instructor at the University of Arkansas. And the other one is my mentor and my dear friend, Daisy Gatson Bates, who was also our civil rights leader here in Arkansas. So thank you for allowing me to sing their praises. So what I'm going to do in the next probably 10 minutes or so is just to talk about how this book came about, Mahalia Jackson's book. And I think Nzinga knows pretty well, but I lived in Chicago for 7 years, my husband and I. And during my time there, we became friends with two people, Roland and Berlene Burris, who you all probably know. And during that friendship, they invited us to dinner, and we went to dinner with them.
Hi.
And
Uh-oh, could everybody please mute? Okay, sorry about that. Well, wait a second. I think I muted you too. Wait a second. Can you unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted.
Okay, we hear you.
Yes.
I hear you.
So as we were having dinner with the Burrises, they began to tell us about the history of their home. And we learned that they lived in Mahalia Jackson's home, that they had purchased from her just months before she passed away. And we were just kind of flabbergasted. The only thing I knew about Mahalia Jackson at that point was her role in Imitation of Life. I mean, I knew her voice because I knew she was an amazing singer, but I didn't know much about her life. And to be sitting in her home and to have the Burrises share some of her history was an amazing opportunity. And as we were leaving their home, they were kind enough, he was kind enough to tell me to hold up 1 minute, and he went, someone says they can't hear. Regina Bunton.
Oh, that's my mom. Oh, gosh. That's not gonna work. Let me see. Hold on, please. Is everyone not able to hear? Okay, let's use that chat, please. Let's use the chat. If anyone else is unable to hear, please send a note in the chat. Okay, so maybe it's maybe it's something else. It might be your volume. But okay, so I will. Everybody else can hear. Okay, looks like everybody else can hear. So yeah, Mom, please check some other options. Or maybe if you log out and then come back in, that might work too. Okay. Thank you, Janice, please.
Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit and just tell you that when we left the Burrises' home, we left with a huge box of information, documentation that had been left at the home. After she'd left and moved to another location in Chicago, whoever cleaned out her house had left some documentation there. And Roland Burris knew that I was a writer, and he said, I'll give you this only if you tell me you will write a book on Mahalia Jackson. And that was 2000. That was about 2005 or 6. So you see how long it's been since that promise was made. But I was in the process of writing other books, so I put it off for quite some time. But like many writers, during the COVID-19 pandemic was when a lot of us did some introspection and thought about what we should be writing. What are the kinds of books we need to be writing, given the times, given what else was going on in the world? And I decided that it was time that I wrote Mahalia Jackson's story, because though it had been written before, it had been a while since anyone had done another book on her. So I felt that it was time. And she was such a huge piece of American history that she deserved another book, at least one more book, but many more, hopefully, before it's all over. So this book began to take shape in about 2020, right around 2020, and I worked on it pretty nonstop for the next couple of years. And it was actually published in 2022, just a few months ago. So I'm going to read a little bit of what I wrote, because I don't talk as long as if I read rather than just speak extemporaneously. So I'm going to read this. When this book finally took root in my mind, I became immediately excited about resharing Mahalia Jackson's story with the generations of Americans who knew nothing of her contributions. And just as important for those who knew of her, but knew little about her commitment to civil rights and justice, and her long relationship with the great leader, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And that, I think, is what fascinated me the most, to see that other side of her that we don't generally see. So I spent years between my other commitments, researching, going through historical sites, photo archives, personal letters, listening to her voice, her conversations with interviewers, as well as her singings and recordings, and talking to as many people as I could who actually met and knew Mahalia Jackson. What I also knew was that at some point, as I do every time I write a book about other people's lives, is that I needed to hear their voices in my mind, to hear them talk about themselves, or let me know how they feel about the direction that I'm going. While there were books I could read and history that had been collected over the years, there was that aha moment that I always wait for from the subject that I'm writing about. And I did get that from Mahalia Jackson. My journey to collect as much hard material on Mahalia Jackson first took me to her home in New Orleans. And that was an amazing experience because I could feel her presence. And there, you know, New Orleans is considered a spiritual place in a lot of ways, and I think I can understand why. But Mahalia was 16 when she left home, and she would return later when she became the Mahalia Jackson. And though she never, you know, moved back, there was always that place that she would go back to, where she was raised and where she knew so many people. What I think I've learned over the years during research for books on amazing people like Mahalia Jackson is that there are three pivotal points in our lives that will dictate who we are or who we become. And one of those is how we come into this world. The second is the people who make up our world, our family, our loved ones, our friends. And the third is how we leave this world. Only on Sundays is based on the life journey of Mahalia, who was an American icon and a music legend. She was born into abject poverty and delivered into abject poverty when she moved to Illinois. Mahalia Jackson's life story, to a great extent, is a universal one. It's a story of the Black American migration from the South in search of that elusive American dream, which lived in the hearts and souls of so many, but was realized by only a few. Mahalia Jackson was one of the blessed few. She was part of a third generation of her family that moved to Louisiana, into New Orleans from Louisiana. Her grandparents were slaves, her parents were laborers, her father worked on the New Orleans docks, and her mother worked in the homes of white families. Each generation experienced a different level of social injustice. With these systemic injustices came the sense of inferiority that was a lot of who Mahalia Jackson was. She knew her place in the world. She was sure about one thing: she owned a truly amazing voice, which was God's gift to her when she was very young, even before she became an orphan, which took place at 6 years old when her mother died. After her mother died, she was taken in by her Aunt Duke and Uncle Emmanuel, who taught her a great deal about serving God and surviving in a white world. But it left her seeking emotional completeness throughout her life. There would be, as I researched and kind of learned who she was, a feeling of displacement, I think, within Mahalia throughout her life. Probably the most defining part of her point in her life was when she decided to leave New Orleans and to leave Aunt Duke. And she was just 16 years old when that happened. But she left with the hope of becoming a nurse. And she never made it into nursing school because once she came to Chicago, she realized that she had to, again, help out the family, the two aunts that she lived with. She became, again, a worker in a home, a washerwoman. She worked in a hotel, cleaning hotels. So she kept doing a lot of the things that she had been doing in New Orleans. But the blessing was that she also found a niche and she found her voice there. Let me see, I'm going to skip some things and just say that more than anything, Mahalia lived for Sundays. People ask me, how did I come up with my title? Sundays meant freedom, and the one day she became something more than a washerwoman or tasked with taking care of white children. She was a child star at Mount Moriah Baptist Church in New Orleans, Louisiana. And even as a child, she loved being a star. Her aunts, Hannah and Belle, were considered adept at seeing. And when they looked into little Haley's future, they saw success and riches. They promised her she would one day sing in front of royalty. And that happened. In 1927, that was when she left New Orleans, and her life became something completely different at that point. She joined church, her aunt's church. She began singing with a choir. She began touring with a group there at the church. And from that point, she just kind of made her way in the world in Chicago. She was very much not invited into large churches or prominent churches because she brought who she was with her. And that was not exactly what some of the churches wanted. So she had to make her own way. But by the late 1930s, she had become, her voice was pretty much known around Chicago. And she got her first break when she went to a radio station and taped a song, and Moving On Up. And that became a million record seller. So from that point on, she became the Mahalia Jackson that most of us know. She married twice. She never was lucky in love, but she did marry two men that she cared about. She had a good life, but she also had a hard life. She worked very, very, very hard. And because I guess the most important points in her career were during the Jim Crow era, it was very, very hard for her to move from one place to another, to perform in places that were segregated. So she experienced a lot of the same things that other people did, even though she was a star. She traveled the world. She was an unmitigated star in every sense of the world. She was a friend to leaders of countries, to our presidents, to all the great places she performed, Carnegie Hall, all of the places that people want to perform at. She was able to do that. Performed for presidents at the White House. So she was an unmitigated star. She was one of the few African Americans who had their own radio station, and not radio station, but radio show, and her own television show. That was kind of unheard of at the time. But again, she lived a hard life, so illness took over later in life, and she died in 1972 of diabetes and heart failure. And she was recognized in Chicago first with hundreds of thousands of people, and then in her hometown of New Orleans, where her body was laid to rest in 1972. So she lived an amazing life. And I didn't talk about Martin Luther King Jr., but he was a huge part of her life for about 10 years. She met him around 1956, and they became great, great friends. And she helped him out tremendously as far as fundraising, introducing him to everybody that was anybody in her circle. So it was a symbiotic relationship, and they became great friends. And I write a lot about it in the book. And I think I will stop at that. Um, and if you'd like to ask questions later on, I'm more than happy to answer them. Thank you.
Oh my, thank you so much. You know, I I have to ask this question before we move on. So there is a movie out, Remember Me, the Mahalia Jackson story. And of course, I love to recommend people to read the book before they go to see the movie. Now, how did you just happen to release your book at the same time the movie comes out? Tell us the magic.
There was no magic. I promise you. I can tell you this. When I first started on the book, and serious starting on the book, I did contact her family, and her family were very nice, but they said, we can't talk to you because we're working with this group who's doing a movie. And I said, oh, really? So I thanked them, and I just kept doing my research. I did not know when the movie was coming out at all. But there has been 2 movies. There was one movie before this last one, and it came out, I think, 2 years ago or a year and a half ago. And now this one that just came out. I knew nothing about the second one at all. So this fall, I knew that my book would be coming out in the fall, but I was very surprised to learn that it coincided with the movie.
Oh my goodness. And I am really enjoying it. I like that you call it creative nonfiction. And the voice that you use to write it, we're able to get deep into the mind of Haley or Mahalia Jackson and her whole thought process for choosing her husbands. It was really, it's really interesting. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone, hold tight. We're going to move to our third this is a pre-recording, which also already includes the introduction. So I'm going to share my screen again. First, let me I'm going to pull up the interview with Natasha Tarpley. And let me just share the screen in a second. Okay, share screen. Okay, greetings everyone. I want to welcome you to our pre-recorded segment with Natasha Anastasia Tarpley. We are so happy to have her, and I'm just going to go ahead and introduce her, and then we're going to have a conversation that's going to be about 15 minutes, and I have 5 questions we've already prepared. So Natasha Anastasia Tarpley started writing when she was only 7 years old, my goodness. And from that young age, she understood that stories could change the world. She's the author of the best-selling picture book, and I'm going to ask her to put it on screen. I Love My Hair. We love this book. It's just, I've sold so many over the years. It came out in 1998. Then she wrote Bippity Bop Barbershop. She wrote Destiny's Gift, which of course I love because it's about a bookseller. And in 2021, The Me I Choose to Be, which I also have here. Oh gosh, we're gonna definitely talk about the photographs that accompany that one. And her latest one in 2022, Kiana Loves Her Family. Yeah, okay, so I love all the illustrations. Natasha is the recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship and is the co-founder of Wunderbar Media, a project seeking to expand the depictions of children of color in media. She lives with her family right in Chicago. So I'm just so happy to have also been able to meet her in person. So, yay, everybody's clapping, of course, in the background. And let us begin with our questions. And I thought it would be fitting to start. Well, today's today's principle is Kuumba, or creativity, and you certainly are a model of that in writing these beautifully illustrated books. I want to just begin with your classic, I'll call it, I Love My Hair. This book was written, before it was popular, I'll say, to talk about our natural hair in 1998. And I recently wrote a blog where I highlighted the statistics of the books that were written about Black characters and by Black authors. And in 2014, which is way after, long after you wrote your book, but in 2014, Walter Dean Myers drew to our attention that only 2.9% of the 3,000 plus books that were written contained Black characters, 2.9% in 2014. And yours is in 2001. So we know it was even worse back then. What was going through your mind at that time? Were you aware of that research? Please tell us more about your creative process in getting it started.
Yeah, first I want to thank you, Nzinga, for having me today, but for all of the wonderful work that you've been doing with Afriware and your advocacy for Black writers and books for all of these years. You are just a wonderful, wonderful resource and a treasure. So thank you for having me and for doing the work that you do. I guess the question is going back to I Love My Hair at the beginnings. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Yes.
Yeah, at that time I wasn't aware of that research in the sense that I didn't know those statistics. I've, over the years been following them, and unfortunately, there's been some improvement, but we're still at a deficit.
Absolutely.
Both of those statistics that you mentioned, books that feature Black characters and also books that are written by Black people. So that whole idea of who controls our story and our narrative is something that I'm constantly kind of wrestling with and advocating for in my work and with others. But intuitively, I knew this back in 1998 because I was an adult at that time, obviously, but I was very aware that the messaging that was being given or sent out or portrayed that featured Black children just seemed so limited. And on top of being limited, it felt like it was always very heavy. It was always very, I want to say the word punitive, but I don't really mean that it was meant to punish the children, but it was meant as a way that didn't celebrate them, that made them feel like they had to explain something about themselves and who they were. And so when I started thinking, I started off writing books for adults. So my first two books were Testimony, which was an anthology of writings by Black college students. It's no longer in print, but it has writings by some of the authors today who have had these, really who are in the stratosphere, like Ta-Nehisi Coates and Kevin Young, like very early writings by those authors.
Okay.
And then my second book was called Girl in the Mirror, which was a family memoir in the voices of myself, my maternal grandmother, and my mother. But I transitioned into children's writing at that time, and just wanted to change the energy as well as the messaging that I was seeing. I knew that hair was still an issue, although that was kind of secondary to what I was doing. I really wanted to infuse a sense of joy and whimsy that would invite specifically Black children to really see themselves and think about themselves in kind of more, I hate to use the word positive, but it just doesn't feel as big as what I'm trying to get at, but just to kind of change internally how they saw and felt about themselves. So that's kind of where I Love My Hair came from.
I just love that you not only identified the problem, but felt empowered enough, to try to offer a contribution to the solution, and as a writer, the specific wording that you select is so important, and it comes through just beautifully in that book and all of your books. Again, just thank you for your timeliness and for your courage to honor what you knew needed to be filled in that area. The next question jumps into the latest two books, and oh gosh, where to begin? What are the inspiration for these two? The Me I Choose. We could start with the Me I Choose to Be, that has photographs instead of an illustration, and working with Regis and Karan Bethencourt and their photographs. I mean, it just really dazzled the imagination. So tell us more about that one, and then we can move to the latest one.
Yeah, so that one came about sort of like as a collaboration that I was invited into. My editor, actually, of I Love My Hair at Little Brown, was interested in working with Creative Soul, who is how that's the name that Karen and Regis go by in their professional life, Creative Soul photography. And they're so well known for doing these just beautiful, imaginative portraits of Black children. That is what they do in their work. And the interesting thing about this, and since we're talking about the photographs, in working with them, I found out that their models, the children that they photograph, also have a voice in how they want to be portrayed. So they, help pick their costumes and makeup and things like that. So, I mean, that's really, that I was blown away by that, which also, fit in with this theme. So as I was saying, I was invited, my editor wanted to do another book with me. She wanted to do a book with Creative Soul. And she's like, hey, why don't you guys work together? And so I've been wanting to return to kind of this. I Love My Hair is a very spare book in terms of the language. The language is more poetic. It doesn't have a narrative, a traditional narrative. And so I wanted to return to a form of writing that allowed for a lot of space and could touch on those kind of imaginative points, but that again allowed for space for the photography to really fill in and show that idea of imagination.
I have to show these photographs too.
They're amazing. And I was inspired a lot by, and this was, as you mentioned earlier, this was a book that was begun during the pandemic.
Okay.
And one of the things that I was concerned about during that time when we had George Floyd, we had, the disparities, health disparities that were coming out with COVID. Mm-hmm. And especially after George Floyd, the whole sort of anti-racist language and movement that happened, in corporate America and in other spaces, I was like, this might be good, or whatever good intentions were involved in that. I felt like it also kept Black kids again in that space where they're always having to kind of wrestle with these very specific parts of their identity, that the world was only interested in them in the context of, well, let's talk about race, or let's, let's deal with this situation. But the internal impact, the internal kind of lives of Black children, I feel like we don't pay enough attention to. And so that's what I was really trying to get at. With this book and with all of my books, it's on the surface, it's like, you know, you're beautiful, you're wonderful. But really what I'm trying to do is get kids to acknowledge that on a deep internal level, so that whatever challenges they face, be they racism, or whatever challenges that they face in the world, they have a more holistic sense of who they are and a stronger like foundation within themselves. So they're not always at the mercy of other people defining who they are and who they should be. So that's where that whole "the me I choose to be" comes from. It's about claiming that power to choose who you are and recognizing all of these beautiful facets of who you are as a person, as a whole person.
And it does that so well by stimulating the imagination with the photographs, and then your words do feed the soul. They literally do. I am light. You know, I am light, traveling the universe with ease. You know, it just takes them away from this, well, at certainly post George Floyd, very chaotic, very emotionally heart-wrenching time. It takes them to the future where we know we want them to dream. We want them to craft and create a future that is better than the one we're in. And we're already bogged down, but if they get too bogged down in that too, that's a recipe for the end, you know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And oh gosh, yes, someone has to dream that dream, as our ancestors somehow did in the midst of their chains and chaos and torture conditions. Oh my goodness. I'm just so, it's so wonderful to hear an author to just be so mindful of all of the different pieces and to care so deeply, you know, of course, identifying with us. This is the ideal. And I was just really happy to also see the Black illustrator. I know that doesn't always happen, but that should be the new norm. Okay.
I've been very fortunate. All of my illustrators have been Black. So I've been very pleased with that.
And what role do you play? I think this is off of our script. What do you have a say in that? Do you say off the bat, you know, this is who I want, or how does that process?
Yeah, when I first started out, no, I had no input. I mean, I was very pleased. I did, E.B. Lewis and I did 3 books together. Bippity Bop Barbershop, I Love My Hair, and JoJo's First Flight. And so in all of those instances, I was not able to choose him. I didn't choose him. The publisher chose the illustrator, but I was so fortunate that they did, because I love his work. I mean, it's just beautiful. Destiny's Gift, the same thing. But as I've gotten, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. So I've gotten a little bit more established. And so with the latest books, I love The Me I Choose to Be. That was a collaboration. Like I said, I was invited to participate in that. But with the new series, the Kiana series, which you mentioned, Kiana loves her family. I was able to have a little bit more say in the illustrator, in that I was presented with a series of choices of illustrators, and I could kind of give some input. I still didn't have necessarily the final say, but I did have more input in that book.
I mean, I want to read the about this book paragraph. It's just 3 or 4 sentences, but I don't recall the detail in other books that point out all the different roles that go into creating a book. It's definitely listing more than just the author and the illustrator. So
I noticed that too. That's
good.
Yes,
Oh,
that's
yes.
one of the first times that I noticed that too.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so here's
Yeah.
what it says. Here's what it says. The illustrations for this book were created digitally and finished with a handmade watercolor texture overlay. Okay, that's like, wow. This
Yeah.
book was edited by Alexandra Hightower. So edited, the editor's listed, and
Yeah.
designed by Veronique Lefevre Sweet. So the design is different from the person who actually draws it.
Yeah.
The production was supervised. What?
Yeah, I had never seen that before. It was like, really?
Production.
Yeah,
I mean, and then it tells, you know, the fonts even. I thought, wow, that's really.
I have seen fonts before.
Oh,
The
okay.
whole listing of people who were, it is new. I've never
Okay.
seen it before.
Okay, why do I love it as a bookseller? Because you of course want more and more people to be attracted to the field, and it's much more, you know, than just, you know, carrying books.
Yeah,
There's so many places that people can fit in.
right.
Creatives, you know,
Yeah.
creatives. So okay, let me get back to my gosh, I knew this was gonna happen. We have about 5 more minutes, and I have 3 more questions.
Right, I'll try to be
Yeah.
quick.
Okay, were you aware of the workplace stigma associated with wearing natural hair at the time? What are your thoughts about the Crown Act that passed in 2019? And of course, I acknowledge your book is paving the way for that Crown Act.
So I wasn't aware of that in my own experience. I mean, obviously I was hearing about things, and you know, and I've always worked in kind of non-traditional spaces. I had one corporate job, and I, you know, was fortunate I didn't have any issues, but so anecdotally I was aware of that, but it really didn't feed into, I mean, I guess, whatever, I said it was going to be quick, but anyway, the short answer is it didn't really feed into what I was doing at that time. And as far as the Crown Act, it, you know, great, yes, hooray, we have this legislation, but it just makes me so sad too that we still have to have something like this.
Yes.
And I just wonder how we shift the paradigms. You know, legislation is one way. I just don't know. It's very sad that we're still at this point in our society, in our country. So those are my short answers.
Work to do, yes. Okay, so this next one is a big one. Don't be as short, because I know that the new writers would appreciate your experience to share with them. Any recommendations for people just starting out or considering becoming writers?
So I'm going to combine this with a plug for the new book, Kiana Loves Her Family.
Okay.
Because this book features a little girl, Kiana, who actually is inspired by the character from I Love My Hair. So that's, her name is also Kiana, and we see Kiana and I Love My Hair and her little inklings of her life. We see her with her family a little bit in that book, and we get a sense of her imagination, but not really a full sense of her persona. So when I pitched the series, we wanted to kind of bring Kiana to a new generation, but also make her the center as opposed to her hair. So she looks different, you know, it's sort of different setup, but that's sort of the origin of that. And so in this story, Kiana is a little girl. She has all of these big ideas, and she is so excited about trying things and exploring and experimenting and trying to bring her ideas to fruition. And in the story, she's trying to plan this movie night, but it doesn't go exactly as she hoped. And so she is leaning on others to kind of help her and create something that is even better than what she initially thought about. So my way I connect this with young writers is that essentially this is a series that's about, for me, it's about the creative process in a lot of ways. It's about having ideas and being comfortable with your ideas maybe not working out in the way that you planned, or that your ideas might change, and to kind of give yourself that freedom to experiment, to explore, to have ideas, and not be so locked in to one thing. So that's one piece of advice, just to approach the world with this huge sense of creativity and imagination, to not question your ideas, because people will make you question yourself in a heartbeat, and to really, believe in that. As far as writing, I mean, there's no magic to writing. If you're going to write, that's the thing, you have to write. You have to practice your craft and put the things down that are in your mind and heart. That is the only way that they become whatever they're trying to become in the world. You've got to be dedicated to that. And reading too is a really big thing for me. I started off as a reader before I even started writing, and that kind of got my brain to a place where I was really immersed in stories and absorbing them and figuring out how to tell a story or so I think reading is also a really good way to start getting your mind trained in different ways to tell a story.
And basically just hop in,
And
try. You're gonna mess up, try
Yeah.
something new. Excellent, excellent. And as we wrap up, the last is, I don't know if you're able to announce, but I just want to ask, are there any film or animations talks coming up, or not yet?
the answer is yes, but they are not things that I can talk about. So
Okay.
yes, I have a podcast, a new podcast. Actually, if any of your readers or audience members are into podcasts, I did a podcast called Opal Watson, Private Eye, and it's for kids. It's a mystery podcast. It's about a little girl on the south side of Chicago who solves mysteries, African-American girl. And that was on Pinna, PINNA.FM. It's a paid service, but I think you can listen to some of the episodes for free. So I have a new podcast, not related to that one, coming out. And then I also am working on some television stuff.
Ooh, you heard it here first.
Yeah.
We will happily stay tuned with your progress. Again, thank you so much for joining us and being flexible and creative to, pre-record this segment. We so appreciate your work, and please stay encouraged as you continue forward.
Great. Thank you so much, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, we will stop it.
All righty, let's see. I'm going to pause the share. And we have the last but not the least, definitely not the least. Can everyone still hear me? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so before I introduce our next esteemed guest, I want to invite you, if you need to grab some water, before we get started, and also invite you to gather your thoughts for questions to write in the chat. I should have announced that earlier, but hopefully you have been thinking about questions to ask the two guests who are online with us, which are Janice Kearney and Dr. Bacon, who is going to speak shortly. So yeah, make sure we're going to communicate through chat. No one is going to come on live. We're following recommendations from other publishers, but please, we are eager to hear your comments and or questions in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to now, let me see, I think I need to stop. Let's see. I want to get rid of this thing right here. Okay, what did I do? What did I do? Oh, I think I need to close that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I'm a bit new at this end. So what I'm now seeing, my screen is not looking like it was before. It looks like, are you all able to see? Okay, let me let somebody in. I'm going to click on Cuddy. Let's see. One participant can share multiple. I think I'm cool. Okay, let me check my chat here. Maybe somebody's trying to give me some hints if I'm
on the Zoom. Let me call you back.
let me see. I just tried to.
Your screen is still up, Nzinga.
My screen, okay, that's, oh, stop share. That's what I need to do. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, all right. So with that, I am now going to introduce Dr. Bacon, and let me make sure I have the speaker view. I do have the speaker view showing. Okay, Dr. Bacon, you all are in for a treat. That's what I have to say. When I talked to him a few days ago, he was mentioning that he was on his yacht. Okay. He was enjoying life. He's enjoying life. And so of course I need to know, I need him to spill the tea. I want to know everything about how he has become a self-made millionaire. Dr. Bacon is a former school superintendent and college professor. Currently, he's a professional speaker, seminar leader, author, and director of a Chicago charter school. And what I failed to do, I'm going to do right now, is bring up his book, just so you can see. There's 2 of his books that we're carrying. And again, for any of the books that you have heard on today's Kwanzaa event, you can just type in the author's name in the search bar. Okay, so How to Teach Kids to Be Millionaires. He is a member of the National African American Speakers Association and lives in Chicago. Dr. Bacon educates and entertains his audiences with his humorous, warm, and powerful presentations. And with that, I'm going to stop my share and please give a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Bacon. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you. I am honored to be with you today, and I want to congratulate you on what you're doing. I am really feel fortunate to be around authors and writers. I am not an author and I'm not a writer. I happen to have published 3 or 4 publications, but I actually hate writing. But I found out going to school and in the workplace that I needed, in the field I was in, needed advanced degrees. And the only way I could get to the top of the earning cycle in my area was get a PhD degree. And so I stumbled through it in Northwestern and got one. But in no way did I enjoy doing theses and dissertations and all that. But I grew up in a village that I could go to smart people and say, I need you to edit this, I need you to rewrite it, I need you to outline it. I can verbally present it, but writing it was very difficult. So you want to know how I was inspired to write the book? I grew up in the Jim Crow South, very, very broke. My dad taught me we were never poor. Once I asked him why there was a hole in my shoe, and I had cardboard in it, and he couldn't afford to get me another pair of shoes. I said, Dad, why are we so poor? He said, son, we are not poor. I said, well, look at this shoe. He said, that's not a sign of poverty. You broke. Anything broke can be fixed. All you need is some money, and the way you get money is get a job or a business. This was his story to me at 10 years old. And by 12 years old, he never bought me another pair of shoes. And I never asked him why we were so poor. When I didn't have any money, I said, Dad, I'm broke. Could you lend me $1 or $2 until payday? But I was convinced. So my book was really inspired after 30 some years in education, from a teacher to a superintendent. And the one thing I worked with was huge numbers of African-American teachers. And the one thing I found about them, that they all, 95% of them live from paycheck to paycheck, no matter what they made. When I was working and they were making $30,000 a year as teachers, they live from paycheck to paycheck. When I retired, someone was making as high as $100,000 a year, and they were still broke. And we were still getting calls from creditors and still haunted by debts. So after I retired, I had nothing to do. I was 55 years old. I had the resources to live over the rest of my life. So I decided I was going to do public speaking. And through public speaking, a few of my friends said, you really ought to put that in a book. Luckily, one of them was a great stenographer. One was a great writer. So I sit down and outlined my first book, How to Teach Kids to Be Millionaires, and dictated chapter to chapter to her, rewrote it, and employed a guy to do the graphics and the cover design, and I had a book. Sold 10,000 copies the first year I had it on market, made about 100 speaking engagements, and found out I not only had a book, I had a business. So yeah, obviously I was very motivated by that, and I was able to sell another 10,000 copies and give away 10,000 copies. So that's how the book came about. And it led me to the second book of How to Teach Cosmetologists and Barbers. I had two friends who were in the business, grossing more than $100,000 a year, and they were broke. So I sit and interviewed and researched that field and did a book for them. Now, people always say, well, how can I become rich? And why did you write a book to kids about being a millionaire? Well, number one, I had another title in mind. And I was not writing to kids, I'm writing to adults. Although people call it a kid's book, the how to teach means an adult person in a child's life teaches them, because most of the people, adults I talk to who can't manage money, say they were never taught. And usually they say my parents or my guardians didn't teach me. So I decided most bad money practices start when you're a kid. For example, all my research, I found out when you give a youngster 2 or 3 years old $1, the number one thing he'll ask you, can I go spend it? Can I go to the store? So somehow he's stimulated that the only thing he does with money, or she does with money as a youngster, is spend it. So I've started my education out primarily with saying to parents to teach their kids, there's only 4 things you can do with money. I won't give you the quiz, I'll tell you real quick. Number 1, you can save it, you can spend it, you can invest it, and you can give it away. Some people say, oh, you can lend it. I said, no, I've lent out about 30,000 in my life and got back about 1,000. So a loan is generally a gift, especially if it's to a friend. So there are really basically 4 things you can do with money. And when you start a youngster out, teach them the last thing you do with money is spend it. He has the first lesson of how you're going to have money, because it has no bearing on what your income is. I know people who gross $1 million a year and they live from paycheck to paycheck. I know people who gross $50,000 a year and they live paycheck to paycheck. So it isn't a matter of how much money you get, it's how much you spend and how much you plan to keep. So much of my teaching that I want to give to parents to teach their kids, from the time they ask you, and parents want to know, what time should I start teaching money? The first time your child says, can I go spend this dime, a nickel? Well, it's $1 now. They don't have nickel candy anymore. I'm dating myself. But when they say, can I go spend this $1? It's time to tell them no. You can put 25 or 50 cents in the piggy bank, and you can think about what you're going to spend it with. But we can't spend it right now. because you do impulsive spending as most of us do. So much of my work around, since I published the book years ago, I've lectured to more than 200, given more than 200 speeches on it, and worked with mainly parent group and kid groups, groups of all ages. But the number one thing you start out with is understanding the 4 things you can do with money. And the number 2 thing is making the last thing you do with your money is spending. Number 2 recommendation is have a plan for every dollar that comes through your hand. Because if you don't have a plan for your money, somebody else does. If you ever look at TV objectively, they never tell you to save money. They have something for you to buy from the time you wake up in the morning until you go to bed at night. And there are messages on top of messages. It's perfectly okay to spend. Don't keep a penny, because our system works on how much money we can get out of people who have no money in terms of spending. The big lesson, the overall umbrella lesson to have money in this country and the world is to live below your means. What does that mean? Living below your means no matter what your earning is, whether it's $50,000 a year, or $100,000 or $200,000 a year, figure out a way that you can live off of 75% of that, and you can become wealthy. Because if you can figure out a way at 30 years old, even 40, that you can invest wisely $5,000 or $6,000 a year at a good compound interest rate, you can have $1 million in 30 years. That's simple. Or if you study the market and you're smart enough, as some of my friends did, when a stock like, what's the one that sends out all the mail orders? Amazon. When Amazon went on the market back in the 90s, and you've been smart enough to put a measly $5,000 in it, you'd have more than $1 million today. So that's a quick and easy, simple, but the simple way that most people acquire wealth in this country is living below their means, investing and keeping a percentage of their money. More millionaires in this country are made through their own business, become millionaires through their own business in any other way. I spend a small chapter talking to parents to teach their kids about home-based businesses. Because there's one simple rule in this country about making money in business. As a book owner, you know, buy low and sell high. You can get a book for $1 and sell it for $25. You sell 100, you got $2,500. That basic principle, if you teach it to a youngster at 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, there are actually youngsters I have researched on who now with the internet that have made $1 million in 1 year gross with a home-based business. So the key to making money is, number 1, living below your means, taking a portion of the money that you earn, investing and saving it, and consistently doing that and having a plan for every dollar you make. For example, impulsive spending is a very big thing in the US because everywhere you go, they have stimulations for you to do it. So it's not easy to walk out of your house and before you return, spend $100. People do it all the time. They have stores they call dollar stores that they have everything from $1 to $100 in. And people walk in to spend $5 and they walk out, they spend $105, $110. Having a plan that if your plan says, I don't stop at the dollar store this year, don't stop at the dollar store this year. If your plan outlines everything that you're going to spend your money on a week, within a month, within a year, and you have a plan to keep, invest, and save a portion of that money, that's the way you become rich. The serious thing about the book, my presentation of how to teach kids to be millionaire, each one of the principles I talk about and each one of the chapters, starting a youngster at 3 or 4 years old, having them also read it with you and teaching them those principles, you can, and then the other thing you have to do as an adult in a child's life, I believe, is model that behavior. For example, if you're teaching your kids don't impulsively spend, then when you go out and he's with you, don't allow him to say, make a left and let's go in this Golden Arch place and spend $25 on some bad food. You simply don't do that. You said, no, we're going to buy a pound of hamburger, some buns, and some frozen French fries. We're going home and both of us are going to have a quarter pounder for $10 2 times. And we're going to save the other $15. Now, you say, that's hard to do with kids. I used to have 2 kids. They're in the 60s now. But I practiced that with them religiously because number one, I couldn't afford McDonald's at the time. And number two, I knew if I got in the habit of pulling in there, spending $15 or $20, they were going to fall out in the car and I was going to have a real problem with them then. So I simply said, no, we got to stop at Aldi's here, get a pound of hamburger and some rolls and some pickles. And this is the way we do it at home. And each area of spending, you have to begin to do that. Just like I used to have a big problem with designer gym shoes when my kids finally found out that everybody was wearing Jordans or somebody, and they wanted $150, $200. I said, I got a Foot Locker deal here for you, $15. If you got some money, we'll get a pair of Jordan. But if you don't have, we're going to Foot Locker $15 or $25. And I do not care what they're wearing in school. This is what you're going to wear. You're a baker. Enough sad questions for me?
Well, oh my gosh, you are blowing our minds with your gems that you are sharing in such a straightforward, practical manner. That's why I'm riveted to what you're saying. I think we're all just like, whoa, these are easy to implement ideas that you're sharing. I'm gonna check the chat just to see if anyone has any. I don't see any right now, but can you speak a little bit about, you mentioned that you are giving seminars. Are they open to the public that we could let people know about?
I could. Many of them are follow-up on lectures that I've given before, and people just invite me back. I stay out of the cold weather much of January and February, so for the next 2 months, I plan to be in the islands somewhere where the weather's a little warmer, but after that, I'll start rescheduling. I can very easily email you and let you know.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. I want to once again, well, thank you, first of all, for sharing that powerful information that we can implement. And oh, I do see a comment here. Okay, hold on a moment. Something else is popping up on my screen for some unknown reason. Hold on, please. Okay, my grandmother used your principal when I was growing up. Maybe it means my grandmother used to be your principal. I'm not sure. I was amazed at how much she saved by saying no. Or maybe you were my grandmother's principal. I think that's what she's saying. I was amazed at how much she saved by saying no, sewing clothes, etc. And she's thanking you. She's thanking you.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear that. Always glad to hear that.
Okay, I don't see. I'm sorry?
Oh, break it down. Living below your means. Okay. Good question. That's I asked to be off. One of the things we do as Americans, as our income increases, we increase the comforts of our lifestyle. For example, years ago, I lived at 8133 Champlain, a beautiful 5-bedroom house, brick, 3 bedrooms in Chatham. Today's market would probably be $200,000 house. Once I got in the house and could pay the mortgage well and the taxes, and my income went up, I decided no longer is that house good enough. I've always wanted a condo looking at the lake downtown. So what did I do? I went in debt for twice that amount of money, sold the lower mortgage that was probably around $1,000 a month. And suddenly I have $2,500 a month mortgage and taxes. Had I been real smart and said, Chatham is still a nice neighborhood, it was the mid-'80s, I can put $1,500 a month in the bank by living below. Wow. If I had just made that simple decision, $1,500 a month is $18,000 a year. If I did that for 10 years, even in a good mutual fund, I would have had $600,000. Had I been able to identify some good stocks that grew 10 times our value, I would have probably had 2 million. So just a simple decision, and not put off the decision to move into a fine condo overlooking the lake forever. 5 or 10 years gives me $500,000 to $1 million more. Second example, cars. I've always loved cars. And my dad never had a new one. And I promised myself I would buy nothing but new cars until I got smart. And that's too long a story to go into. But when I was driving, a Cadillac was a car of choice for middle income African Americans in the 60s. By the late 70s, Mercedes was the car of choice. Cadillac at the time was $10,000. Mercedes was $20,000. I elected to go in that because I didn't have the cash, get rid of my Cadillac and get a $22,000 Mercedes with a note almost 2.5 times as much as it was a Cadillac, which meant instead of paying $400 a month for a car, I'm now paying $1,000 to have a Cadillac because that's the car of status. Had I took that $600 again for 10 years, $7,200 a year, with $72,000 with interest at a normal 10%, I would have had $200,000 or $300,000 just doing that. Now, take the day-to-day more simple things. Food. As you know, Americans are the most obese people in the world. We eat more than anybody. And we eat mainly the wrong stuff. And with today's conveniences of ordering food from out, most of us spend twice as much on food as we should. Number one, in my opinion, there's only one healthy diet to have, and that's a plant-based. If it doesn't come from a plant, you don't eat it. I've been a vegetarian for years. I can eat as a single person on $60 a week very well if I have no meat. When I was eating meat, my 2 choices of meat were filet mignon and tenderloin at about $20 a pound. Just 4 pounds of that a week is another $80 on top of my 50. Imagine saving on the average of $50 a week to $200 a month, $2,400 for 10 years is $24,000 with interest is another $24,000 just on a simple thing like food. I'm a lover of Starbucks. I used to drink $5 and $6 cups of Starbucks until I did the math on it. So now I buy a pound, bring it home and brew it, and I can take a pound and drink on it for 2 weeks for $15, where I was spending $15 in 3 days and sometimes in 2 days. Just small, simple things like that. Clothing is another one. Clothing is a very, very big thing with African Americans, especially the designers and hanging around millenniums and the rappers. I cannot believe that anybody in their right mind would pay $800 for a jogging suit because it has some G's on it, or some P's on it, or some R's on it, the same way with. So what I'm saying is the person who figures out a way that they buy very little designer stuff and buy the same item made in China without the designer's name. For example, the difference in a Ralph Lauren suit for a man is about $1,000 than it is from Men's Warehouse. Now, everybody doesn't want to wear Men's Warehouse, but there are brands in between that. Just on clothing, you can cut down your overhead if you don't wear high designers and crazy designs and modern designs 50%. So food, clothing, shelter are 3 of the main things that we can reduce our cost of living. And I'm not saying reduce that cost of living so low you look like you just came out of a resale shop, but I'm saying if you're on high end, you can reduce it. Other people study the consignment market where they buy almost new garments for 75% off. So food, clothing, and shelter, basic ones that we can cut our overhead off, as well as vacations, as well as socializing. The same example I gave you of looking, researching, and being an educated consumer instead of paying the top dollar, pay it at a bargain price or a discount.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Bacon. We've got a few comments for you. Your examples are great. You're right, with inflation, going plant-based has saved me a lot of money. Also, one also has to have knowledge of good choices with the clothes and the cars. And I'm also saying we only have 4 minutes left, right? Because we want to make sure everybody is safely at home, especially yours truly, before the shooting starts. There is a question here for Janice. Good evening, Ms. Kearney. What was one of the most significant facts that you learned through your research on Mahalia Jackson that most people are not aware of? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Let's see.
Thank
Okay.
you for that question, Nichelle. And yes, I talked a lot about her acumen in business. She was a great businesswoman. She was not a well-educated woman. She told people that she went to 8th grade and she actually went to about the 4th grade, but she had a natural ability to create businesses and be very successful at it. She owned a flower shop, a floral shop. She owned a beauty shop for years, and she owned lots of land and property. She started buying land and property when she first started making money. And Dr. Bacon would be very proud that she knew how to save money. She began very early saving money. So she was very good with money. She was a very good businesswoman. And I think the last business that she owned was actually she invested in was a chicken, what she called a chicken shack, I think, or a chicken restaurant. And it was around for a while, I think. She did that with Dr. Benjamin Hooks, but she was very, very good in business.
It's so interesting.
Excuse me, and Zinger, I sent Ms. Carney a note about 10 minutes ago. I don't know, maybe I'm not able to get it through or something.
Let me just backtrack a bit and see. Oh, you sent it to her directly?
I tried both of you. And
What did it say?
Yeah, go ahead and share it with us.
okay. Well, I just wanted to mention that you said early on that Mahalia Jackson wasn't welcome in a lot of the churches, and neither was Dr. King because of the old Mayor Daley. And
Absolutely.
but today in the churches with the tax exemption and 501c3s, they seem to be reluctant to speak out against the LGBT propaganda that's forced on children in school. And my feeling is that, and that's biblical, and my feeling is that silence is complacent, because they've gone from sagging pants to sagging skinny jeans. And that seems to be the culture. The rap music has gone from fratricide to LGBT propaganda. So what could we do, not just as pro-revolutionaries, but just as concerned citizens? What could we do about it? What's your recommendation?
I probably couldn't address that very well. I can address something if you have a question specifically about the book, though, or about Mahalia Jackson. And thank you for adding that about Dr. King. You are completely correct, because she was the one who actually got him into some of the communities and some of the groups here in Chicago. They were not accepting of him either. You're right.
I would add that he mentioned the baggy pants and the pants law, as well as moving from that. Number one, I think we can be each individual ambassadors to try to remove ignorance and stereotype beliefs about a person from what they wear or how they wear their hair, as the young lady said earlier. I think we have to do, as Dr. King says, we have to judge each person by the content of their character, not the clothes they wear, the way they wear their hair, or their choice of gender, what they decide to do with their own lives. And I think as soon as we can educate ourselves to accept all people by the content of their character and try to get away from labels, we're better off. I do not believe that, and I have some dear relatives and friends that are gay and that are queer, and I don't love them any less than I love my straight ones. And they have the same right to everything that we enjoy as anybody else. The same as a young man who chooses to wear their pants down to the, as long as they cover, and it's okay, let them wear that. I remember a thing my dad said to my mom when I was a kid, when I wore funny styles and funny colors. She said, let him go around looking like an idiot now. He'll grow out of it. He'll see people and he'll watch me and he'll watch good role models and he'll be okay.
You know, I think that's an excellent note to end on. We're a little bit 2 minutes over our time, and I certainly will say I am in great agreement with Malcolm X, who focuses on what we have in common. You know, I think that's a great place to always start a conversation, and we cannot draw conclusions based on the surface. This is what we see on the surface. So everyone, I wish you a wonderful Kwanzaa, tomorrow being the last day. I'm just going to, and I want to thank my staff here holding down the fort while we're able to broadcast live from Afriware Books. We wish you a happy new year and continued great cultural programming. We're just so thankful to these authors and speakers and models in our community, their willingness to share their personal stories with us. It was very inspirational, and it was just very inspirational and powerful for me personally, and I think that others were as well. I'm just going to take another quick peep in the chat to see if I'm missing something. There's a lot of thank you alls for being here. So I am going to, I didn't get, as you all know, I did not get to record the entire Kwanzaa program here, but what was recorded, and if I'm able to add, yeah, I can probably splice that on the part that wasn't recorded from the pre-recorded portion onto the entire program. And I'll put that in the next email. If you're not on our email list, please go to afriwarebooks.com. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's a link you can click on to join the email list. So again, hugs to everybody. Wishing you health and wealth. Yeah, that's a great combination. In the new year. Thank you all. Mwah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.